This is Earth, the mother that houses all the species that are known to date. And yet there are still more to be discovered. Approximately 1.7 million species have been found, and biologists continue to add to the plethora of all the domains of life: bacteria, eukarya, archaea, branching out to even more distinctly defined taxons such as Plantae and Animalia. As thy say, nothing is permanent in this world. The approximated 1.7 million species that exist to date is perpetually multiplying into more species, making the count virtually impossible. With this growing number, scientists are presented with the opportunity to study the ever-growing abundance of Earth's children. This is
Earth has changed drastically over time, and along with it, species diversity has been affected. Environmental conditions greatly contribute to changes in local distribution and abundance of species. Over geologic time, there have been dramatic long-term evolutionary changes and patterns of global diversity, largely as a result of speciation and global extinction. Evolution of diversity among vascular plants can be used as an example because it presents an interesting pattern. The early vascular plants, the rootless and leafless hylopods, went extinct by the end of the Devonian period and was replaced by ferns, flourishing during the Carboniferous period. By the early Triassic, this group decreased in abundance while gymnosperms continued to diversify. For the past 100 million years, the gymnosperms then declined and angiosperms took its place. Over the past 600 million years, the number of different types of organisms has been increasing.
Hadouken!
Declines during the late Devonian and Permian periods have been observed and was identified as periods of extinctions.
Life on Earth is not only a history of its increasing species richness, but also of extinctions. Extinction is a widespread event. It is the rapid decrease in the diversity and abundance of organisms. Extinction occurs at an uneven rate due to the unpredictable occurrences of its causes. There are 5 different mass extinctions which are referred to as the Big Five, where there was more than about half of the life on Earth lost. These Big Five mass extinctions are Ordovician-Silurian extinction, Late Devonian extinction, Permian-Triassic extinction, Triassic-Jurassic extinction, and Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction. During the Ordovician period, around 450 to 440 million years ago, all known life was confined to the seas and oceans. Climate change was the selection pressure, having approximately 60% of animal genera go extinct in this period. About 375 million years ago, extinctions were more prominent in tropical environments, especially those in the reefs of shallow seas. There were many proposed hypotheses on the case of these 2 mass extinctions. Notable causes were due to cooling of the Earth, bringing about glaciation and sea level changes, which has disrupted the habitat and the living requirements of these organisms, preventing their survival. The next on the list of the Big Five is the Permian-Triassic extinction, also known as the Great Dying. It occurred 250 million years ago, wiping out organisms where no class of life was spared. The extinctions in the Triassic period 200 million years ago were a combination of smaller mass extinctions. The extinctions of more than half of the known living species allowed dinosaurs to take over some of the habitats that were previously occupied by the extinct organisms. The Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, also known as the KT extinction event, is popular for the death of the dinosaurs along with other organisms. These remaining three mass extinctions were hypothesized to be caused by severe volcanic eruptions, temperature and sea level fluctuations, and asteroids or comets striking the surface of the Earth.
Even if Earth looked like it was losing all the life it contains every after extinction, living organisms were able to make their comeback, with some making their debut in nature to once again colonize a particular habitat.
Here in Tambopata, Peru, E.O. Wilson once found more species of ant in a single tree than there are in all of the British Isles. And scientists have seen this pattern all over the world. More species exist near the tropics. Why is that?
What factors could possibly be responsible for the observed latitudinal gradient of species richness? Although scientists do not know the exact mechanisms underlying the geographic pattern of species diversity, more than 25 different mechanisms have been proposed, like age of community, stability of the climate over time, spatial heterogeneity of the environments, and ecosystem productivity. An example of the potential role of age community and stability of climate is the Pleistocene era, which was an epoch of great climatic fluctuations throughout the world. Some 20 glacial cycles occurred during which ice sheets advanced and retreated. At maximum glacial extent, up to 30% of the Earth's surface was covered by ice. But as the climate warmed and the ice sheet retreated northward, plant species invaded the glaciated areas. The implication is that, during the past 18,000 years, the distribution and abundance of species and the subsequent structure of forest communities in the areas affected by the glaciers like eastern North America have changed dramatically. Another mechanism that has been proposed related the relationship between area and species diversity. Species richness increases with increasing area. Tropical rainforests are some of the most biodiverse places on Earth. It's not just the abundance of it, it's how many different species we find in a given area. But why is that? In reality, the tropics contain about 40% of area on Earth. Larger areas, as we have learned, usually have more species. Species in tropical ecosystems are at a higher density, and climate is one factor. When we look at plant fossils and when and where we find them in Earth's climate history, tropical forests are older than temperate forests. They've had more time to get rich. But just because the tropics don't have cold winters and they've survived the last ice age doesn't mean it's easy to survive here. There are dry and wet seasons, and there's competition for resources.
On average, tropics are warm and they get plenty of water. This part of the planet gets more average solar radiation throughout the year, which means that plants and all of the animals that they support get more energy, making them more productive. Niches are the habitat and conditions that one organism needs in order to flourish. In tropical rainforests, there are a lot of niches. Organisms that live at higher latitudes have to be more adaptable. They have to be able to handle lots of different conditions. Specialization is risky. Organism must be adaptable. Life in the tropics are stable. Therefore, more different kinds of life are found in the tropics. In the equator, there are the same number of hours of day and night no matter what month it is. And all these might explain a reason why more species coexist near the equator. The tropics are crowded, so the competition for resources is extreme. That competition drives organisms to specialize, like how we see ants or caterpillars that might be able to live on one single plant. But because climate and seasons are more stable, that specialization isn't as risky. When we examine the spatial distribution of the oceans as a function of latitude, we see that the surface area of oceans is greatest in the tropical regions, and is therefore positively correlated with observed patterns of species richness.
Energy is the ability to do work. It is a ubiquitous and inevitable property of life that all living things need in order to sustain life. Self-sustaining plants gather solar energy as they photosynthesize to produce the nutrients they need. Solar energy comes in the form of photons, where it activates certain photopigments within the plant. Once photosynthesis has taken place, chemical energy, mainly in the form of glucose, is available for primary consumers. Animals and other heterotrophs feed off these producers and gather the chemical energy they need as they go on with their daily activities. Some of these primary consumers are targeted by a hierarchy of consumers that feed off each other, generating a food web of predation. Decaying plants and animals are also broken down by microorganisms of the soil, adding to the flow of energy throughout Mother Nature. But the flow of energy is not a cycle. As energy is passed on from organism to organism, some energy is lost in other forms, such as kinetic energy, heat energy, and etc. Approximately 10% of energy is passed on, and the rest of the energy is redirected and transformed. Species richness is related to environmental energy. David Curry, a professor of the University of Ottawa, studied species richness in relation to environmental energy available for vertebrate taxa in North America. He studied potential evapotranspiration as a function of environmental energy, and he found that species richness has a positive correlation with potential evapotranspiration. The richness of two crab species, for example, Brachyuran and Anomura, has been found to decline with increasing latitude. An increase in latitude means a decrease in temperatures. Now here's meteorologist Brittany Beggs to discuss other functions of evapotranspiration.
Air humidity, air temperature, and the wind all play a role in the evapotranspiration rates. So the question remains, why do we even care about evapotranspiration? Evapotranspiration is actually the second largest component of the hydrological water balance behind rain. Evapotranspiration is an important process in the water cycle because it is responsible for 15% of the atmosphere's water vapor. Without this input of water vapor, clouds couldn't form and rain would never fall. Winds affect evapotranspiration by bringing heat energy into an area and removing the vaporized moisture. A 5-mile-per-hour wind will increase a still air evapotranspiration rate by 20%. A 15-mile-per-hour wind will increase still air evapotranspiration by 50%. Daily fluctuations in evapotranspiration also occur. On clear days, the rate of transpiration increases rapidly in the morning and reaches a maximum usually in the early afternoon or mid-afternoon hours. The midday warmth can actually cause closure of the plant leaf, which results in a decrease in the transpiration rate. The average annual evapotranspiration for irrigated lands varies greatly, and it depends on the grass or the crop type and the amount of water that is being applied. During a drought, however, the natural vegetation can experience what we call moisture stress, where irrigated grass and crops continue to grow and transpire at a normal rate.
Researchers from Canada examined the relationship between patterns of species richness in North American tree species and several variables describing regional differences in climate. Although variation in species richness was correlated with climatic factors such as integrated measures of annual temperature, solar radiation, and precipitation, it correlated most strongly with estimates of actual evapotranspiration. Actual evapotranspiration is the flux of water from the terrestrial surface to the atmosphere through both evaporation and transpiration. It is a function of both the atmospheric demand for water brought about by the input of solar energy to the surface and the supply of water from precipitation. The pattern of increasing species richness with increasing AET parallels the positive correlation between actual evapotranspiration and net primary productivity, thus suggesting a relationship between plant diversity and primary productivity. In other words, environmental conditions favorable for photosynthesis and plant growth may well give rise to increased plant diversity over evolutionary time. The same researcher also demonstrated a relationship between climate and species richness of vertebrates across North America. He found a positive correlation between potential evapotranspiration, an index of integrated energy availability, and regional patterns of species richness for both mammals and birds across North America. Although the correlation between potential evapotranspiration and vertebrate species richness offers hope of a mechanistic interpretation other than latitude, potential evapotranspiration is correlated with temperature, solar radiation, precipitation, humidity, and a host of other abiotic factors that vary with latitude. Like actual evapotranspiration, potential evapotranspiration also correlates with the plant productivity. In fact, the same researcher reported a positive correlation between vertebrate diversity and plant species diversity. Given the correlation between plant diversity and net primary productivity, the correlation between plant and animal diversity may relate to the positive relationship between primary and secondary productivity. This suggests a relationship between secondary productivity and animal diversity similar to that observed between primary productivity and plant diversity. Animal diversity is linked to plant diversity because variety in plant species provides a variety of potential food sources as well as suitable habitats for animals. Increased structural diversity within plant communities, as measured by foliage height diversity, provides a wider range of microhabitats and associated resources, and consequently supports a greater variety of animal species. This relationship between habitat heterogeneity and species diversity is not limited to animals. Environmental heterogeneity also gives rise to increased plant species diversity. For example, the diverse topography of mountainous regions generally supports more species than does the consistent terrain of flatlands. From east to west in North America, the number of species of trees, breeding land birds, and mammals increases. This increased diversity on an east-west gradient relates to an increased diversity of the environment, both horizontally and altitudinally. Although mountainous regions may support more species than flatlands do, in mountainous regions, scientists have observed a pattern of decreasing species richness with increasing elevation. The mechanisms underlying a decline in species richness with a rise in elevation may be similar to those involved with changing latitude. Variation in temperature, potential evapotranspiration, actual evapotranspiration, and vegetation structure that occur with increasing elevation parallel those observed with increasing latitude. However, the negative correlation between species richness and elevation may be confounded because high altitude communities generally occupy a smaller spatial area than do corresponding lowland communities in ecosystems located at equivalent latitudes. These high elevation communities are also likely to be isolated from similar communities, suggesting the importance of immigration in enabling populations to persist over time.
The latitudinal gradients of species richness for marine organisms are similar to those observed for terrestrial organisms. The correlation between patterns of species richness and productivity are not as straightforward as those observed in terrestrial environments. In fact, the general latitudinal gradient of productivity in the oceans is the reverse of that observed on land. Except in localized areas of upwelling, the primary productivity of oceans increases from the equator to the poles. This relationship suggests an inverse relationship between productivity and diversity. Circumstantial evidence points to the importance of seasonality rather than total annual productivity as a factor influencing local patterns of diversity for pelagic and benthic species. Observations show that as the influence of seasonal fluctuations in temperature on primary productivity increases, species richness declines and species dominance increases. Recall that primary productivity in the ocean is influenced by seasonal dynamics of the thermocline and vertical transport of nutrients from deep to surface waters. In northern latitudes, the seasonal formation and breakdown of the thermocline result in the productivity of surface waters ranging from very high, spring and summer, to very low in winter. By contrast, the permanent presence of a thermocline in the tropical waters results in a low but continuous pattern of productivity throughout the year. Seasonal variation in the temperature of surface waters functions to increase primary productivity, whereas the lack of seasonal variation functions to support a higher diversity of life. Scientists have hypothesized that geologic history has been an important factor influencing latitudinal patterns of species richness within oceans. Some suggest that glaciation during the Quaternary period may be responsible for lower diversity observed at higher latitudes. During that period, sea ice covered the Norwegian Sea and the northern reaches of the Atlantic. As a result, the polar decline in regional diversity may to some extent represent a recovery from the effects of glaciation. The slow, northward range expansion of plants and animals suggests that the recovery is still in progress.
Diversity can be described at three scales: alpha diversity, beta diversity, and gamma diversity. Alpha diversity is the species diversity at the spatial scale of individual communities. Quantifying diversity is a difficult task. It is hindered by factors like varying size of communities, changing plant and animal diversity over time, and more, which makes it difficult to compare these communities. Beta diversity is the variation in species composition among communities in a geographic area. Increasing environment heterogeneity within a region and beta diversity have a directly proportional relationship. This is because spatial differences in environmental constraints along a landscape function to restrict the distribution of species. Gamma diversity or regional diversity is the total species diversity across all communities within a geographic area. In this scale, diversity can be confounded by time. Example is changes in the species present in a region in a specific season. Evolution drives changes in patterns of diversity through the emergence and extinction of species. Climate also has played a role in shifting geographic ranges of species, influencing diversity.